Earlier, though, today, Jon spoke to the UN's Human Rights Commissioner, Navi Pillay, from Geneva, and he put it to her that her suggestion of a strong possibility of war crimes in Gaza should also include Hamas.
I unequivocally say that the firing of rockets and mortars by Hamas and other armed groups violate international humanitarian law, in that they are indiscriminate and there are no precautions for the safety of civilians. I also want to emphasize that locating military assets in densely populated areas or firing rockets from densely populated areas constitute war crimes.
But in effect, therefore, you are charging that both sides in this war are suspected of committing war crimes.
Of course, if one side fails to comply with international humanitarian law, that does not absolve the other side from complying with their obligations. I have a clear message. Civilians must be protected. Civilians may not be targeted. And all parties have to comply with international humanitarian law and international human rights law. And the criteria of those laws are that there has to be distinction. That, in other words, you have to distinguish between civilians and combatants. You have to distinguish between civilian objects and military objectives. There has to be proportionality, and there has to be precaution.
You will know better than I, Navi Pillay, that particularly those countries supporting the Israeli action against Hamas in particular, but against the Palestinian people in general, will argue very strongly that they are targeting militants and that the deaths of children in particular and of women and of civilians is a consequence, a natural consequence of war.
I have documented and enumerated a number of cases where it points to targeting of civilians, in fact. Firstly, we all have seen footage of children playing on Gaza beach. 7 of them were shelled to death. The ages range from 9 to 11. They can hardly be said to be threats.
Navi Pillay, let me put it to you this way. You have found evidence of war crimes in other conflicts. What confidence do you have that either side in this conflict will be confronted with charges that will lead to some kind of actual prosecution in some kind of an international court?
I have to be very consistently calling for accountability. It's because there's been no accountability, there's been impunity, that we have these cycles of really abhorrent violence, particularly over Gaza and the firing of rockets.
In all honesty, what are the real prospects? The real prospects that anyone will be brought to book? Because if they're not brought to book, if nobody's brought to book, what is the point in the end of your office and of your findings?
I'm calling upon more powerful bodies such as the Security Council, more powerful states that have influence and leverage over this, to support the Secretary General's call for A, for an immediate ceasefire, B, for the removal of the blockade, and an end to the occupation. So it's in this context that these violations occur. Ultimately, it's the right to life of civilians, the right to self-determination for Gazans.